whispers in winter. The December wind bit through Dahlia Everett's thin coat as she hurried up the marble steps of the Whiteridge Hotel. Her violin case bumped against her leg, a constant reminder of why she was here, not as a guest at the prestigious Winter Charity Gala, but as hired entertainment. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, clutching the case tighter. At 24, Dahlia had mastered the violin but not the art of making ends meet. 3 months behind on her tuition at Westlake Conservatory, this gig would barely cover half of what she owed. The event coordinator, a severe woman named Ms. Finch, eyed Dahlia's well-worn boots with disapproval. "You'll be on the raised platform in the east corner. No breaks except the scheduled 15 minutes at 9. And please," she added with a pointed glance, "stay in your designated area." Dahlia nodded, swallowing her pride. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and wealth that made her feel impossibly small. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled while sipping champagne that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She took her position and began to play, her music floating above the chattering crowd. Few noticed her. She was background ambiance, nothing more. Until the third hour, when disaster struck. Mid-sonata, her E string snapped with a sharp twang that echoed through a momentary lull in conversation. Several heads turned. Dahlia's face burned as she frantically reached for her spare strings, only to find her case empty. She'd used her last replacement 2 days ago and couldn't afford more. "Excuse me?" came a deep voice. "Perhaps this might help." She looked up to see a man holding out a violin case. He wasn't flamboyantly dressed like the other attendees. His charcoal suit was elegant but understated, his smile genuine rather than practiced. "I keep spares," he explained. "The foundation has a small music program." Dahlia hesitated before accepting. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Bennett Hayes." He opened the case, revealing professional grade strings. "May I?" She nodded, surprised when his fingers moved with practiced precision as he replaced the broken string. No wealthy donor she'd met before knew how to restring a violin. "You play?" she asked. "Once upon a time. Now I just support those who do it better than I ever could." His eyes, a warm hazel, held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "What was that piece? Vivaldi with a contemporary arrangement?" "My own adaptation," Dahlia admitted, surprised he'd noticed. "It's beautiful." Bennett stepped back. "Don't let me keep you." As Dahlia resumed playing, she noticed Bennett lingering at the edge of the crowd, actually listening while others merely talked over her music. When her break came, she found a steaming cup of tea waiting beside her violin case with a note. "For the cold night ahead. Your music makes this event worth attending." Be later, as she packed up after the final guests departed, Dahlia spotted Bennett deep in conversation with the gala's organizer, occasionally glancing her way. When she left through the service entrance, hugging her violin case against the bitter cold, she found a car waiting. "Courtesy of Mr. Hayes," the driver explained. "He mentioned your violin shouldn't be exposed to this weather." Dahlia almost declined out of principle, but thought of the 30-minute walk to the subway in freezing temperatures. Her precious violin deserved better. As the car pulled away, she didn't see Bennett watching from the hotel steps, already wondering how he might hear her play again without revealing that the foundation hosting tonight's gala was his own creation. Notes between strangers. 2 weeks after the gala, Dahlia pushed open the door to Melody's Corner, the cozy cafe where she performed Saturday afternoons for tips and a free meal. The familiar scent of coffee and cinnamon greeted her as she waved to Olivia, the owner, whose curly gray hair bounced as she wiped down the counter. "There's my favorite musician," Olivia called. "We've got a full house today. Word's getting around about your performances." Dahlia smiled, though anxiety fluttered in her stomach. Yesterday, she'd received notice that she had 1 month to pay her outstanding tuition or face dismissal from the conservatory. The dean had been sympathetic but firm. No exceptions, even for top students. As she sat up in the corner by the window, Dahlia noticed a man in a navy peacoat reading by the far wall. Something about his profile seemed familiar, but she couldn't place him. She began to play, losing herself in the music as she always did, the world narrowing to just her violin and the emotions flowing through her bow. During her break, she nearly bumped into the peacoat man at the counter. "Sorry," she murmured, then looked up. "Oh, it's you. Bennett, right? From the gala?" Recognition dawned in his eyes, though something in his expression suggested he hadn't expected her to remember him. "Dahlia Everett, your performance was the highlight of my evening. Thanks for the car that night. And the string." She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I didn't expect to see you here." Bennett gestured to his worn paperback. "Best coffee in town, according to a colleague. I didn't know you played here." It wasn't entirely true. After the gala, Bennett had been captivated by Dahlia's talent and had discreetly asked Ms. Finch about her. Learning she performed at this cafe had brought him here, though he'd visited 3 Saturdays before finally encountering her. "Every weekend," Dahlia replied. "It helps with expenses while I finish at Westlake." "Westlake Conservatory? That's impressive," she shrugged. "It would be if I could afford to stay enrolled." Later, as she played her final set, Dahlia noticed Bennett watching with genuine appreciation, not the polite disinterest of the gala crowd. When she finished, he approached and left a generous tip. "Would you consider giving private lessons?" he asked. "My niece is learning violin, and she could use inspiration from someone like you." Dahlia brightened. "I actually do teach. Here." She handed him a slightly crumpled business card. The following Tuesday, Dahlia arrived at the address Bennett had provided, a modest apartment in a decent neighborhood. She'd expected something grander based on his gala attendance, but this seemed more aligned with the unpretentious man she'd met. "My sister's place," Bennett explained, introducing her to 8-year-old Zoe, who clutched a quarter-sized violin. "I'm just the uncle who pays for lessons." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Dahlia taught Zoe while Bennett worked on his laptop nearby, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about music theory. After lessons, they'd often talk over tea, Bennett never mentioning his work specifically. Dahlia sharing her dreams of composing and teaching in underserved communities. "Music education changed my life," she confided one evening. "My mother cleaned houses to pay for my first lessons. Without that, I'd never have escaped our neighborhood." What Dahlia didn't know was that after their conversations, Bennett would make calls to his foundation's board about expanding their music program. Nor did she know that when Westlake's dean announced an anonymous donor had established a scholarship that would cover her remaining tuition, it was the man who now waited for her every Tuesday with a cup of tea prepared exactly how she liked it. As January turned to February, Dahlia found herself looking forward to their conversations more than she cared to admit. Bennett had become a friend, perhaps more, though neither acknowledged the growing warmth between them. For now, they were just two people connected by music and gentle conversation. Their true circumstances still partially hidden behind unasked questions. Crescendo of Truth March arrived with unexpected warmth, melting the last remnants of winter snow. Dahlia hummed as she walked toward Community Strings, the small music center where she volunteered teaching children whose families couldn't afford private lessons. Her spirits were unusually high. She'd finally caught up on her tuition thanks to the mysterious scholarship, and her final recital piece was coming together beautifully. The center occupied a worn brick building in Riverview, a neighborhood struggling with gentrification. As she approached, Dahlia noticed an unusual cluster of people outside. Parents, students, and Irene Blackwell, the elderly founder who'd started Community Strings 30 years ago in her living room. "What's happening?" Dahlia asked, spotting tears on Irene's weathered cheeks. "The landlord's selling," Irene said, her voice cracking. "Some development company offered triple the market value. We have 30 days to vacate." Dahlia felt the news like a physical blow. "But where will the kids go? We have 40 students." "Nowhere nearby that's affordable," said Jerome, one of the parents. "This is the only music program within bus distance for most families here." That evening, Dahlia canceled Zoe's lesson, texting Bennett an apology. Instead, she spent hours calling everyone she knew, searching for affordable alternatives for Community Strings. When that yielded nothing, she started researching rental spaces, only to find prices far beyond their modest budget. 3 days later, she entered Melody's corner for her Saturday performance to find Bennett waiting at her usual table, concern evident in his expression. "I was worried when you canceled," he said. "Is everything all right?" Dahlia explained the situation, her frustration pouring out. "These kids deserve a chance with music just like I had. But we need at least $50,000 to secure a new space and move the instruments." Bennett nodded thoughtfully. "That's terrible. What if we set up a fundraiser? In less than a month? Even if every cafe patron donated their coffee money, we'd never reach that amount in time." The conversation shifted as customers arrived, and Dahlia began her performance. Throughout the afternoon, she noticed Bennett making several phone calls outside, his expression serious. The following Wednesday, Dahlia arrived at Community Strings to find Irene beaming. "We're saved!" the older woman exclaimed, clutching Dahlia's hands. "A foundation called Hayes Innovations just bought our building and is leasing it back to us for $1 a year with a 20-year contract." Dahlia froze. "Hayes? As in Bennett Hayes?" "Yes. Apparently he's some tech mogul who sold his software company for billions last year. He's coming this afternoon to discuss renovating the space." The revelation hit Dahlia like a thunderclap. Bennett, her Bennett, who lived in a modest apartment and never mentioned his work beyond vague references to the foundation, was one of the wealthiest men in the country. The same Bennett who'd let her believe he was just a generous uncle who cared about music. When his sleek car pulled up outside the center, Dahlia was waiting, arms crossed. The moment he stepped out, his smile faltered at her expression. "Dahlia, were you ever going to tell me?" she demanded. "Or was this all some sort of game, slumming it with the struggling musician?" Bennett's face fell. "That's not what this was." "Really? Because from where I'm standing, you've been lying since the moment we met. At the gala, that was your foundation, wasn't it? And my scholarship? Was that you too?" His silence was confirmation enough. "You let me pour my heart out about my financial struggles while you could have solved them with pocket change?" Dahlia continued, her voice breaking. "Did you enjoy watching me scrape by?" "I never meant to deceive you," Bennett said quietly. "At first, I just wanted to help without making it awkward. Then, as we got to know each other, I was afraid everything would change if you knew." "Well, you were right about that." Dahlia stepped back. "Thank you for saving Community Strings. The children need this place, but whatever was happening between us, that's done. I can't be with someone who built our entire relationship on lies." She turned away, blinking back tears, ignoring his calls to wait. As grateful as she was for his generosity, the sting of betrayal cut deeper than she'd expected, because somewhere along the way, Bennett Hayes had become important to her. Too important to forgive so easily for letting her believe in a connection built on half-truths and omissions. Behind her, Bennett stood motionless, realizing too late that in trying to be seen for himself rather than his wealth, he'd lost something far more valuable than money could ever buy. Dissonance and harmony, April bloomed with stubborn cherry blossoms, but Dahlia felt none of spring's renewal. Her days fell into a hollow routine, classes, teaching, performances, all technically perfect, but lacking the joy that once infused her music. She'd redirected Zoe to another teacher, ignoring the little girl's disappointed questions about her uncle. At Community Strings, renovations proceeded without Bennett's physical presence. His foundation's team handled everything professionally, transforming the space with new soundproofing, instruments, and technology. Dahlia had to admit it was exactly what the center needed, infuriating her further that she couldn't simply hate him. "You're playing like you've lost something," Professor Lin commented after Dahlia's recital rehearsal. "Technical perfection isn't music, Dahlia. Music needs heart." That evening, Dahlia found herself at Melody's corner after hours. Olivia had given her a key months ago, trusting her to lock up when she needed extra practice space. In the empty cafe, she played without constraint, pouring her confusion and hurt into her violin. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," Olivia said, startling Dahlia. The older woman set down 2 mugs of tea and joined her at the table. "Want to tell me why you're torturing that poor violin?" Dahlia sighed. "Have you ever discovered someone wasn't who you thought they were?" Like finding out your quiet, regular customer is actually Bennett Hayes, the tech billionaire? Olivia raised an eyebrow at Dahlia's shocked expression. Honey, I've owned this cafe for 30 years. You think I don't research my customers? You knew? Why didn't you say anything? Not my secret to tell. Olivia sipped her tea. But I've watched that man come here for months just to hear you play, never once flaunting his wealth or demanding special treatment. That says more about a person than their bank account. He lied to me, Dahlia insisted. Did he? Or did he just let you make assumptions while he figured out how to be himself around someone who wasn't after his money? The question lingered with Dahlia for days. Meanwhile, across town, Bennett sat in his penthouse office, staring unseeing at financial reports. He'd respected Dahlia's wishes to stay away, channeling his regret into ensuring Community Strings received everything needed for its expansion. Sir, the board meeting started 5 minutes ago, his assistant reminded him. Bennett nodded absently. I'll be right there. Instead of joining the virtual meeting, he found himself pulling out his phone to watch the video he'd taken at Melody's corner months ago. Dahlia lost in her music, illuminated by winter sunlight. He'd never shown it to her, capturing it only because he'd wanted to remember how passion looked in its purest form. His sister Julia's words from their last conversation echoed in his mind. You didn't just hide your wealth, Bennett. You hid yourself. How could you expect her to trust you after that? That night, Bennett made a decision. He'd respect Dahlia's boundaries, but he wouldn't leave things unresolved. He began composing an email, then deleted it. Some things couldn't be expressed through screens. A week later, Community Strings held its reopening celebration. Dahlia arrived early to help set up, stopping short when she entered the recital hall. The stage had been transformed with subtle lighting and acoustic panels, and at its center stood a gleaming grand piano she recognized as a rare Steinberg, the same model her mother had cleaned houses around when Dahlia was a child, attached. To the piano was a simple envelope with her name. Inside, she found not a note, but a composition, her melody from the gala, arranged as a piano accompaniment, with a single line written at the bottom. Some things don't need words. B. As families began arriving for the celebration, Dahlia tucked the music into her bag, emotions too tangled to process. What she couldn't ignore was the careful thoughtfulness behind the gift. Bennett had given her not an expensive trinket, but something that recognized her talent and honored her past. Perhaps, she thought as she watched children excitedly exploring their new music home. There was more to understand than she'd been willing to see. Symphony of Second Chances. The summer benefit concert for Community Strings drew an unexpected crowd, filling every seat in the renovated recital hall. Dahlia stood backstage, adjusting her students' bow ties and calming nerves, her own anxiety fluttering beneath her composed exterior. Not because of the performance, her students were well prepared, but because of the reserved seat in the third row. Empty as the house lights dimmed. Ms. Everett, whispered Zoe, who had insisted on returning to Community Strings for group lessons, despite continuing with her new private teacher. Are you watching for someone? Dahlia smiled. Just making sure everyone's ready. Remember, music isn't about perfection, it's about connection. The children's performance opened the evening, followed by local musicians who volunteered their talents. Throughout the first half, Dahlia's gaze kept returning to the empty seat, disappointment growing with each passing minute. At intermission, Irene approached with barely contained excitement. Dahlia, dear, would you consider a slight program change? We've had an unexpected donation offer, a matching grant that would double tonight's proceeds, but the donor has one condition. What condition? Dahlia asked warily. That you perform the duet arrangement of your gala piece. Irene handed her the familiar sheet music, the same composition Bennett had left with the piano. Apparently, there's a pianist who knows the accompaniment. Before Dahlia could respond, the lights flickered for the second half. Finding herself guided to the stage, she was startled to see Bennett seated at the Steinberg piano, his expression a careful neutral as he waited for her cue. For a heartbeat, she considered walking off stage. Instead, she raised her violin, meeting his eyes with a questioning look. He nodded once, fingers poised over the keys. Dahlia began to play, her initial stiffness melting as Bennett's accompaniment wrapped around her melody, not competing but complementing, creating space for her music to soar while adding depth she hadn't imagined possible. They moved together without words, communicating through crescendos and quiet passages, building to a finale that left the audience breathless before erupting into applause. As they took their bows, Bennett whispered, 5 minutes? In the garden. The community center's small garden had been transformed during renovations into a peaceful haven with benches and flowering trees. Bennett was waiting when Dahlia arrived, tie loosened, vulnerability evident in his stance. That was beautiful, he said simply. Why didn't you tell me you played like that? Dahlia asked. There are many things I should have told you. He gestured to a bench and they sat with careful distance between them. I've spent my life being defined by my wealth. When I met you and you had no idea who I was, it was liberating. I could just be Bennett who loves music and drinks too much tea. I understand wanting to be seen for yourself, Dahlia admitted. But relationships need honesty. You're right. I was so afraid of losing the way you looked at me that I created exactly the situation I feared. Bennett turned to face her fully. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding. And to tell you that meeting, you changed everything. The Foundation has approved a national initiative for community music education, inspired by your work here. Dahlia's eyes widened. National? 20 cities to start. Each center designed like this one, with scholarship programs and teacher training. We're calling it the Everett Initiative, if you'll allow it. Bennett, you don't need to decide now. About any of it. He stood, withdrawing a business card, not the sleek corporate kind, but a simple one with just his personal number. This time, complete honesty. I'm Bennett Hayes, tech entrepreneur, foundation director, mediocre pianist who's still taking lessons, and a man who misses our conversations more than he thought possible. Dahlia took the card, their fingers brushing. I'm free Tuesday evenings, she said finally, for conversations, and maybe music. 2 months later, Dahlia stood beside Bennett at the groundbreaking for the first Everett Initiative Center in a neighboring city. As cameras flashed and officials made speeches, Bennett leaned close. Do you know what my favorite sound in the world is? He asked. Dahlia raised an eyebrow. A perfect violin note? The sound of your key in my door when you come over for dinner, he said, his smile softening as her cheeks flushed. It means you're choosing to come back. Later that evening, as they sat at his piano working on a new composition, her melody, his harmony, Dahlia realized that the music they created together was stronger than anything they could have made alone. Like their relationship, it required honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to try again after discord. Second chances, Bennett murmured, watching her notate a difficult passage, are the best kind of beginning. Dahlia smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Especially when the melody finds its harmony. Outside, twilight settled over the city as they continued playing. No longer two separate musicians, but partners creating something new, a symphony of second chances that would echo far beyond themselves. Garden's renewed winter had settled over the city by the time Layla visited the community garden again. 3 months had passed since her confrontation with Julian. 3 months of silence, reflection, and rebuilding on her own terms. Snow dusted the dormant perennials and bare branches, yet the garden retained its magic. Seniors still gathered on heated benches Julian had insisted on installing. Children still explored the winter-blooming hellebores and bright red dogwood stems. This place remained beautiful even in dormancy, perhaps especially so, with its promise of renewal beneath the surface. Ms. Patel. Mrs. Guzman waved from her usual spot. We've missed you. Layla smiled, brushing snow from the bench to sit beside the elderly woman. I've missed this place too. Not as much as Mr. Hawthorne has, Mrs. Guzman said casually. He visits every week to check on the winterization. Always asks about you. Layla's heart quickened. I didn't know he still came. Oh, yes. Very dedicated to this place. Mrs. Guzman patted Layla's hand. Though he seems sad these days, quieter than before. After saying goodbye to Mrs. Guzman, Layla walked through the snowy garden, eventually finding herself at the eastern corner where they'd planned a spring butterfly sanctuary. To her surprise, someone had already prepared the area for winter, carefully mulching delicate plants and installing burlap wind barriers. Kneeling to examine the work, Layla found a small metal marker partially hidden beneath protective straw. It read simply, "Dedicated to LP, who taught me that true growth requires both nurturing and freedom." The months apart had given Layla perspective. Her business continued to thrive, but now on foundations she'd verified were truly her own. She'd declined the settlement from Botanical Empire, instead requesting they establish a scholarship for young floral designers. And most importantly, she'd come to recognize that Julian's help, while overreaching, had come from genuine care rather than a desire to control. 2 days later, she found herself standing outside the unmarked offices of Terra Renewal Foundation. The receptionist seemed unsurprised by her arrival, immediately directing her to the top floor. Julian's office was unexpectedly modest, plant-filled and practical, with large windows overlooking a rooftop garden. He stood when she entered, his expression cautiously hopeful. "Layla," he said softly, "this is unexpected." "I found your dedication at the garden," she replied, remaining near the door. It was thoughtful. Julian gestured to a chair but didn't approach her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About boundaries. About the difference between supporting and controlling." "As have I," Layla acknowledged, finally moving to sit. "About the difference between independence and isolation." A cautious silence settled between them. "I was wrong," Julian finally said. "I should have been transparent from the beginning. I justified my actions as protection, but really I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Layla asked. "That if you knew who I was from the start, you'd never see beyond it." He looked down at his hands. "Or that if you knew the extent of my help, you'd question your own capabilities." "I did question them," Layla admitted. "For weeks, I wondered if anything I'd built was truly mine." Julian winced. "I'm sorry. But then I realized something important." Layla leaned forward. "Every design was mine. Every client relationship I maintained was through my own efforts. Yes, you removed obstacles, but I still had to walk the path myself." Outside, snow began falling again, silent and transformative. "I've made changes," Julian said. "The foundation now has transparent grant processes. All investments are disclosed publicly. I'm learning to help without hiding." Layla smiled slightly. "And I'm learning that accepting help doesn't diminish my achievements." "Where does that leave us?" Julian asked quietly. Instead of answering directly, Layla reached into her bag and removed a small potted plant, a rare miniature rose that had been cultivated to bloom even in winter. In botanical terms, "This is known as a phoenix rose," she explained, placing it on his desk. "It can survive extreme conditions that would kill most flowers, emerging stronger after periods of apparent dormancy." She met his eyes steadily. "Some connections are like that too." Julian's expression softened with understanding. "Are you suggesting we might have a second bloom?" "I'm suggesting," Layla said carefully, "that real growth requires both nurturing and freedom. But it also requires forgiveness and second chances." He reached across the desk, his hand stopping just short of hers. "I'd like that chance if you're willing." No manipulation this time. No behind-the-scenes arrangements. Just truth between us. Layla bridged the final distance, her fingers intertwining with his. "I think we've both learned enough to try again." Properly this time. 6 months later, the community garden burst into spring glory, hosting not just neighborhood gatherings, but a small, intimate ceremony. Under an arch of climbing roses and native clematis, Layla and Julian exchanged vows written on biodegradable paper embedded with wildflower seeds. Their guests were an eclectic mix: seniors from the residence, neighborhood children, Layla's shop employees, Julian's foundation staff, even Vanessa, who had recently launched a smaller, more honest floral business with Layla's blessing. "From unexpected beginnings come the most beautiful journeys," Julian said in his vows, his voice carrying across the garden they'd created together. You taught me that authentic connection cannot be engineered or controlled, only nurtured with patience and respect. Layla smiled up at him, radiant in her simple gown adorned with living flowers. And you showed me that even damaged roots can support new growth if given the right conditions and gentle care. As they sealed their promises with a kiss, applause rippled through the garden. Spring sunshine filtered through new leaves, casting dappled light on two people who had found their way back to each other, not through wealth or manipulation, but through honest growth and mutual respect. Later that evening, as sunset painted the garden in amber hues, Layla and Julian slipped away from their celebration to sit on their favorite bench. In comfortable silence, they watched fireflies begin their evening dance among the flowers. "I have a confession," Julian said, taking her hand. "I did arrange one last thing without telling you." Layla raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" He smiled. "The garden's land title was transferred this morning. It's now independently owned by a community trust, with permanent funding for maintenance. So not even we control it anymore," Layla realized, understanding the significance. "Exactly. It belongs to itself now, and to everyone who needs it." Julian squeezed her hand. Some beautiful things thrive best when simply allowed to grow on their own terms. Layla rested her head on his shoulder, watching as more fireflies emerged among the plants they'd chosen together. Like us. In the fading light, their silhouettes blended with the garden they'd created. Two people who had learned that the most enduring connections grow not from control or dependency, but from the delicate balance of nurturing and freedom. Their story, like the phoenix rose that now flourished in every corner of the garden, proved that sometimes the most beautiful blooms emerge after the deepest frost, stronger and more vibrant for having endured the cold.